The Chinese, of course, I think we all knew the Art of War by Sun Tzu. And Sun Tzu, one of his famous aphorisms is that you use the weight of your opponent against them. So, Mark, it's not only that the Chinese are, for lack of a better term, screwing the Americans, they're actually using the weight of the U.S. government against the investors. They have created this system, whether by skill or luck or good fortune for themselves, where everybody has the ability to shed responsibility. The PCAOB can shed responsibility. The SEC can shed responsibility. The audit firms and their affiliates can sort of shed responsibility. And it all comes down to the investor having the courage and the knowledge of knowing that, except there are usually before you get to an investor, a fiduciary or someone who has at least a suitability obligation to the investor. And I'm bringing that back to our report, because if you are an investment advisor for someone, if you are a buy side or a sell side analyst, you have a responsibility. If you're a portfolio manager for a pension fund, you maintain that responsibility. Even though everyone else can shove off that responsibility, you have it. And if you don't know this information, if you're not aware that these firms are not being being regulated and oversawn by the SEC and PCAOB, it's now on your shoulders. It's not on the Chinese country, the CCP's responsibilities. They basically get to say, well, not only is it that the American investor is going to get hurt, but we can put all the blame, because of U.S. law, using the weight of your opponent here, into the backs of the fiduciary and the suitability obligations of those players. That's why they need this report. So they can go down through this and go, no SEC regulation, we're out. We should not be investing money from portfolio for our pensioners in a company like these.
Brian, that's such a great point. I mean, you're exactly right. Ultimately, these financial advisors who are required to exist at that fiduciary level, and I would argue for the suitability level for something as significant as lack of oversight. Now, and I would just want to add talk about one thing which makes this point, and that is in our blog on Luckin, we talked about Luckin is, and I've been a forensic accountant dealing with frauds for decades. Luckin, to me, is the single most brilliant fleecing of investors that I've ever seen. And I don't mean that in terms of like, well, they did
in an evil way.
I mean, you talk about systematic fraud. I mean, this company looks like it was created for the purpose of fraudulently fleecing as many Western investors and bankers as well. In fact, in this particular case, it was a consortium of bankers that lent Chairman Liu, $500+ million with security being his shares. I mean, we're talking about every kind of place that you could get Western capital. I mean, the timing of it, May of 2019 was their IPO date. That's right after they got their audit from EY Yao Ming for 2 years. Previously to that was all finished. So the audit was finished. Supposedly it's all good.
In 6 weeks.
And then there's no requirement for 404 internal control examinations. There's no requirement for an auditor to go in there. And all of a sudden, in the fourth quarter, actually, of that same year, of that same company year, the fraud gets announced, and it's something that causes. I mean, after inflating revenue and diverting costs, right? Inflating revenue, raising money, sending the money out to buy inflated things, which, if anything, was bought. The company then, with the inflated growth of revenue, the share price goes through the roof, and then all of a sudden there's this massive fraud investigation that gets announced, and short selling, et cetera, And I have very little doubt that when somebody gets through investigating this, if ever, that what we'll find is that not only did the CCP or members of the CCP and the company itself, not only did they end up taking huge amounts of money out of this company, but actually made money on the short as well. And will make, believe it or not, and to add insult to injury, I have no doubt that the bankruptcy process that Luckin's going to go into will end up that one of these same people will end up buying the shares back out of buying the assets out of bankruptcy for pennies on the dollar. And another 3 or 4 years from now, there'll be some other enterprise that goes public or tries to go public to do this all over again. I'm telling you, this is the most brilliant.
Well, I think
it's like watching an Ocean 11 movie unfold. You know, the brilliance of the robbery here is just unparalleled. You're like, how did they pull this all off? But yeah, Joe, sorry.
I
it
think
should be a movie. There's no doubt about it. I'm telling you, this is like, of course, they make the Ocean's 11 theft look like a pennies on the dollar, because this is in the $2, $3, $4 billion range. I mean, we're talking about the most breathtaking amount of money just directly stolen.
Right. Yeah,
from
9
Western
billion
investors,
or something.
and the Western investors don't have any ability to go after it.
Well, I think, Mark, if we have done the what I was thinking about this in terms of the Luckin, it's not just an isolated case. It's a model. It's now become a model. There's no doubt they noticed, hey, we made a lot of people in China realized they made a lot of money off of Luckin and a lot of American investors. They have to figure out how did it happen and how can we do it again? Of course, they're thinking we have a system in place here. How do we get all this money from Western capitalists or European capitalists? I guess it's Western. This is a model for doing this again. They don't think this is an isolated case. If you're an investor out there, the other thing I'd like to, 2 quick points. One, in terms of the SEC, reading the SEC statements on China, the SEC principle has always been that they want an informed investor, and you talked about having valid financial information and so forth. In this case, reading some of these statements, the SEC is admitting, they have no oversight here. You have no reason, we can't verify these filings from any of these Chinese companies or investigate them. And yet it seems to be that an informed investor now means if I inform you that you're actually not being informed, then that's enough information to make you an informed investor. If I inform you that you're not informed, are you an informed investor then? That's a very, very different standard of what it means to be an informed investor. I think.
It's an old standard, the caveat emptor standard that we abandoned. The American system abandoned the caveat emptor standard back in the 1920s at the latest, because it was unworkable. It was unworkable for a modern society. Sure, it works for an agrarian society where you've got some farmers trading horses with one another, but when you have this complex systems and these investments, it doesn't work. It's too easy to exploit people, and Luckin is just a really great example.
One other quick point about that. Oh, sorry. Where is the demand for this, right? That you have, it's passive investors who got fleeced. A lot of passive investors who went to their mutual fund company and bought into an emerging market ETF that put money into, and a lot of that money went into China. And you can look at the holdings of these companies. Look at some of these emerging market ETFs. I was looking at a couple before we started here, and they're holding these Chinese companies. And the passive investors, right? Their whole idea, they're trusting their mutual fund or ETF provider, their financial advisors trusting the New York Stock Exchange, the SEC, the auditor. Everyone's trusting this whole chain, and then even and this caveat emptor at the end of it saying, well, it's not my fault. You should have known as the investor. The whole idea of passive investing being, not paying attention is the goal. But it's passive investment money. A lot of it went into this company, and so this passive investing when there's in Chinese companies is that little combination is a recipe for a lot more fraud to come.